Oh, wow, look at this. I got a package from my good pal Richie. Alright, let's take a look at what's in here. Look at this. We got a bootleg copy of The Many Saints of Newark. Nice. Ooh, some gabagool. Yum. Oh look, it's a pair of Adriana's panties. How do you know I wanted some of these? Oh, what's under here? Oh my god. It's the jacket! What is up, Sopranos fans? Kino here, and I am so excited for the first day of Sopranos Timber. As you guys know, I'll be doing a new Soprano log every single day this month until the 21st. And we are starting off Season 6, the last season of the show. Or technically it's the second to last season if you count Season 6 as two distinct seasons. There's a Season 6A and a Season 6B. Some people consider them one season, some people consider them two. But either way, we are wrapping up the show. I'm very sad to be at the end here, but I am so excited to review it with you guys. Thank you so much for watching, and let's jump into the episode. This is Members Only. The episode opens with Agent Harris and his new partner. We're going to learn later in this episode that Agent Harris has been transferred away from the Mafia division of the FBI to counterterrorism. So that's going to change his dynamic with Tony in this season. But the very first line uttered is from his partner. And he says that no one ever went broke underestimating the tastes of the American public. This is a quote from another author. And I think it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek joke about the fact that this show's writing goes against the, typical industry standards of, doing something predictable and instead challenges the viewer. And that's why this show is so incredible. So I think it's kind of a joke against that. But this is actually the first episode to not feature the traditional Star Ledger opening that we get at the beginning of most seasons. Last season, we didn't get Tony getting the Star Ledger because he was separated from Carmela, but we did see it in the intro. And instead of that, in this episode, we get an intro montage. And this is the first kind of indication that this season is going to be, in some ways radically different from the rest of the show. The montage is set to the song Seven Souls, and it features a reading from the author William S. Burroughs from his novel The Western Lands. The song and the reading from the novel really touch upon the themes of death and the afterlife, and these are themes that we're going to see throughout this season. And another interesting note is that almost 2 years have passed since last season. We see some changes. One, AJ is now in college, and two, Janice now has a daughter named Nika. And the sequence ends with Carmela dreaming about Adriana. She's thinking about, what might have happened to her since she disappeared a long time ago. And this is going to come up again in this season. Meanwhile, Tony helps Uncle Junior look for money that's buried in his backyard. Junior needs the money for his upcoming retrial. And he thinks that his old rival Pussy Malonga stole it. You'll remember that in the pilot episode, Junior was trying to kill Pussy Malonga in Artie's restaurant. So we can see that their rivalry goes back a long time. However, Pussy has been dead for years, and we can see that Junior is starting to lose his memory, his dementia is creeping back in, and he's, losing touch with his old self. Janice says that they should put him in Green Grove. It's an assisted living facility, and they can take care of him there. However, Tony refuses. He says that they're family, and that, family takes care of each other, even though that's where he put his mother at the beginning of season 1. Meanwhile, Phil is now the acting boss for Johnny Sack while he's in jail awaiting trial. There's still some lingering tension from last season. You'll remember that piece of shit Tony Soprano's cousin, I can't even say his name, killed Phil's brother, and Phil is still resentful even though he's agreed to put it behind him and move on. Later, one of Phil's men attacks Hesh and his son-in-law for stepping in on his territory, and Tony tries to arrange a sit-down with Phil, but Phil's not really cooperating with him. Tony goes to John's brother-in-law, a man named Anthony Infante. He's the brother of Ginny Sack. And Tony asks him to deliver a message to John for him. He then proceeds to steal some sunglasses from Anthony, which seems like a dick move if you're asking a guy for a favor and then you immediately steal from him. But Phil finally agrees to meet with Tony and they settle their business. Now, Christopher really hates dealing with Phil. Last season, Phil tried to have Christopher killed in revenge, but Tony says that they need to placate him to avoid conflict with New York. New York has over 200 soldiers in their family, and if it ever went to war between them, it's going to be very bad for the Soprano family. Foreshadowing. Meanwhile, Eugene meets with Tony and tells him that his aunt died and left him a $2 million inheritance. Now, Eugene wants to retire from the mafia and move to Florida. Tony is really hesitant to let him go, though, but he says that he'll think about it. Later, we see Eugene wearing a members only jacket. That's where the title comes from. Members only not only refers to the clothing brand, but also the fact that Eugene is a member of the mafia, and that's part of the central conflict with him in this episode, whether he can leave or not. And it's also connected to the series finale, but we'll get to that later. Meanwhile, Tony and Carmela have dinner at their new favorite sushi restaurant. Carmela reminds Tony that he needs to get the building inspector to clear the house that she's building with her father. However, Tony doesn't do it, and the inspector ends up stopping work on the house because Hugh used the incorrect wood for building the frame of the house. Carmela's upset by this, but Tony buys her a new car, and she's distracted and she forgets all about it. She's really proud of the car, and she actually goes to Ginny Sack ostensibly to, take her out on a day to be nice to her, but really she's doing it to show off her new car. She just is so proud of it. However, later she has dinner with Angie Bompancero, and Angie shows her the car that she bought with her own money, and this kind of takes the wind out of Carmela's sails, and Carmela is really jealous that Angie was able to accomplish something on her own rather than having her husband buy it for her. Later on, Christopher says to Eugene that he'll talk to Tony for him if he'll do a hit. And Eugene agrees, and he goes into this restaurant and he kills a guy. And just FYI, he's wearing his members only jacket. I'm sure that's not connected to anything in the finale. However, afterwards, Tony still declines his request to leave. He says that he took an oath and there's no getting out of this life. His wife's really pissed off because she was really looking forward to moving to Florida, and she says that they need a fresh start. We learn that his son is a drug addict, they have a lot of problems in their family, and to add on top of all of that, we also learn that he is an FBI informant. And the FBI also tell him that he can't leave, they need him to build a case against Tony, so Eugene is really caught between a rock and a hard place here. He feels that there's no hope left for him or his family, so he decides to kill himself. And in the very last scene here, we see that Uncle Junior needs someone to look after him. Janice and Bobby are supposed to do it, but they're busy with their own bullshit, so Tony goes to watch Junior himself. Now, Junior is sunsetting, and he's really confused. He doesn't know who Tony is. He thinks that Tony is Pussy Malonga, so later on, Junior shoots Tony in the stomach and then runs upstairs and ends up hiding in the closet. Tony is bleeding out all across the floor. He's about to pass out, but he manages to call 911 and dial the phone right before he passes out. And that's where this episode ends. A really interesting ending, a great start to season 6. Thank you guys so much for watching, and stay tuned for the next Soprano log coming tomorrow. On the first day of Sopranos Timber, my Gumar gave to me a Sopranos prequel movie. Special thank you to my patrons Hunter, Tommy Smith, Abdallah Alamari, George Jones, Russell, Sean, Graham, Rooftop, Rico Bellick, Part of Markness, Broccoli, Isaiah, Placenta Juan, Logan, Clean, John Reyna, Lance Klump, Jesse Sterling, Andrew Stewart, James, Conchok Chofel, Obstacle Racing Media, and Daz J. Kit. What is up, Sopranos fans? Kino here, and we are back with another day of Sopranos Timber. Today we are looking at the second episode of Season 6, Join the Club. As always, be sure to subscribe and turn on the notifications if you haven't, because I'm going to be releasing a new Soprano log every single day this month. Now, as you'll remember, last episode Tony was shot by Junior. He managed to call 911, and now he's in the hospital with the doctors working to try to stabilize him. He briefly comes out of his coma for a moment and asks the question, who am I? Where am I going? Now that's a theme not only in this episode for him, but also throughout this season of him exploring who is he, where is he going, what does he want out of life. The doctors manage to get him back stabilized. They get him back into a coma so that he can heal up and rest. But the doctors say that the biggest issue he has is not only the gunshot wound, but also sepsis. And it looks like his chances are not really good for him to make a recovery. Carmela starts to break down when she hears this news, and we actually get a really nice Christopher and Carmela moment. They don't really interact too much throughout the series, despite the fact that they're actually blood relatives, not him and Tony. But we can see Christopher really comforting her here. Later, we also see him holding Meadow's hand as they sleep, which is another moment we don't see too often, as him interacting with his cousin. Now, a lot of this episode deals with Tony in his coma. He has this very vivid dream. I'm not going to go too much into the detail of this dream in this episode because I did a whole video on this. Go ahead and check it out. I think it's one of the best videos I've ever done. I'll link it in the description if you haven't seen it yet. But I really cover what I think this dream is all about and what it means. However, I'll point out a couple of details that I didn't cover in the stream that I just noticed now. When Tony is walking by the elevator and the elevator is out of order, there's a sign that says, "Please bear with us." And that, of course, reminds us of the bear imagery that we saw last season and how that basically referred to Tony. Another connection in this episode is the title, Join the Club. Now, Tony mentions this to someone when he's having dinner with these group of business people. He talks about, who am I? Where am I going? And the woman says, join the club. That's something they're all feeling. Now, of course, join the club also makes us think of, joining the club of being a made member of the mafia. Again, last episode was also called Members Only, again, related to that imagery there. And obviously, this episode deals a lot with, in my opinion, Tony's idea of what his life might have been like if he hadn't joined the club, if he hadn't become a mafia member. But meanwhile, Junior has been arrested. A psychologist is conducting some tests to see if he's incompetent or not, to determine whether they're going to take him to trial over shooting Tony. Now, Junior is very confused by all this. He doesn't remember shooting Tony at all. And it's funny, later when the police are investigating the issue, they mentioned that he said this was all part of the JFK assassination. You'll remember that Junior is obsessed with JFK. He loved the man. And we can see that in his delirium, he's still thinking about JFK, even after all this time. Meanwhile, the guys go to Eugene's funeral. Last episode at the end, Eugene killed himself because he felt that there was no hope for his life, being an informant and being forced to stay in the mafia. And we learn that Silvio is now the acting boss while Tony is incapacitated. Silvio is consigliere, he's the second in command, so now that Tony's in the coma, Silvio is making the decisions in the meantime. Now the guys discuss what they want to do about Junior. Ultimately, they decide to leave it alone and wait until Tony recovers so that he can decide what to do about Junior. But we're really seeing conflict between them all, especially around Vito. He is now the highest earner in the family, now that he's taken over all the union jobs and stuff, now that Ralph is gone. And we saw last episode that he's also gunning for the title of boss if Tony dies. Now that he's the biggest earner, he's got ambition, and he's thinking that he might take over if something bad happens to Tony. And we can see a lot of resentment from the other guys around how powerful Vito has become in the family. There's also this funny scene where Paulie says that he's going to buy a little stereo for Tony's room. And Christopher tells him not to do it because he doesn't need the stereo. And then he goes and buys the stereo. So we're seeing that all these guys are kind of gunning for the opportunity to kind of impress Tony's family because they're thinking that this might net them a reward when Tony wakes up. Meanwhile, though, AJ continues to be a disappointment to his family. He isn't helpful. Whenever Carmela sends him to go do a task, he forgets about it or he doesn't do it right. And he embarrasses the family in front of the news people. He also avoids visiting Tony. He's the only one who doesn't sit with Tony and talk with him. Everyone else in the family is doing it, but AJ really avoids it because he's in some ways scared to see his father in that condition. He doesn't even refer to Tony as his father. He refers to him as Anthony Soprano. And that's a way for him to kind of distance himself from the idea of his father being in this really vulnerable position. We also learned that he flunked out of college. And it's not because of this situation. He's been flunking out for a long time. So we can see that, he's just really fucking up his life and making things harder on his family. Carmela continues to make excuses for him, saying that he's scared and that he shouldn't be forced to visit Tony if he doesn't want to. But Rosalie tells her that she has to consider the possibility that AJ is just a selfish, spoiled kid. And she knows all this because she went through the same thing with Jackie. However, Carmela refuses to listen to this. She doesn't want to face reality with her son. Later, though, we see AJ finally sitting down with Tony and talking with him and keeping him company. He's talking mostly about cars he wants Tony to buy him. But even still, he starts to actually pitch in with the family. But he also swears to avenge Tony and get revenge by killing Junior. So we can see that, AJ really does idolize his father and want to honor him in some way. Carmela, though, is the main one who sits with Tony and talks with him, keeps him company, plays music that he likes, and just tries to be there for him. And we can see that, she really does love Tony. Despite everything else, their relationship is really complicated by money and all his betrayals and her betrayals. And at times it feels like they almost hate each other. But we can see in this moment that, she really does care. She talks to him, tells him all her regrets about their relationship. And we get some world-class acting from Edie Falco, especially when she starts to break down. We can really see the love and the fear in her face as she faces the possibility that her husband might die. So just an incredible, incredible job from the actress. And a really powerful episode because of that. And that is the episode pretty much. Again, I know I didn't cover the coma dream, but please go check out that video. It's really well done in my opinion, and it goes through everything that I want to talk about for this dream sequence, including into the next one. So stay tuned for that coming up. The next day of Sopranos Timber is tomorrow. I'll see you guys then. On the second day of Sopranos Timber, my Gumar gave to me 2 Tonys and a Sopranos prequel movie. Special thank you to my patrons Hunter, Tommy Smith, Abdallah Alamari, George Jones, Russell, Sean, Graham, Rooftop, Rico Bellick, Heart of Markness, Broccoli, Isaiah, Placenta Juan, Logan, Clean, John Reyna, Lance Klump, Jesse Sterling, Andrew Stewart, James, Conchok Chofel, Obstacle Racing Media, and Daz J. Kit. What is up, Sopranos fans? Kino here, and we are back with Day 3 of Sopranos Timber. Today we're looking at the 3rd episode of Season 6, Mayham. Now, the episode opens with Vito giving Paulie a tip on this Colombian gang's hideout. He says that there's a lot of money stashed away there, and that they should be gone by around noon. However, when they arrive, they find that the gang is still there, and it erupts into this big fight. They manage to kill the Colombians, but Paulie gets kicked in the nuts, as usual, and he's pretty injured by this. However, despite, the bloodshed and all the mess that they leave there, they manage to find around $1 million stashed in the hideout. Meanwhile, Chris and Bobby talk to AJ. They learn that he was trying to find a gun in order to kill Junior, and they tell him that he can't do this. 1, Junior's locked up in federal holding, but 2, Tony would not want him involved in this way. Tony doesn't want his kids to be involved in any kind of crime, and they tell him to, just let it go. Meanwhile, however, Tony's condition is continuing to get worse. They're not able to, regulate him and keep him stable anymore. And this really upsets Carmela to be faced with the possibility that Tony might die. Carmela runs into Melfi at the grocery store later, and Melfi says that if Carmela ever needs to talk, her door is open. Carmela declines, but she's very clearly, upset by all this stuff. She's fried, she's tired, and she really does need to express herself. Later, she blows up on AJ after a news story comes out where he talked to the press, and she says some very mean things to him that he's basically a cross to bear for their family. So all this makes her realize that she does need to talk, so she ends up going to talk with Melfi, and she tells Melfi that she's worried that their criminal lifestyle is ruining their children. They're being exposed to all these news outlets talking about them, and they've had to pay the price for, Tony and Carmela's sins. Carmela knew who Tony was when she started dating him. She accepted that. She even kind of liked all the money and power that he had, but she doesn't like how it's affecting their family like this. Meanwhile, Silvio continues to act as acting boss while Tony is in the coma. There's an interesting detail in that he tells his wife that before Jackie Sr. passed away, he briefly considered Silvio taking over as boss instead of Tony. And I think this detail is also kind of a reference to the fact that the actor Stevie Van Zandt was considered for the role of Tony for a little while before they decided to go with a more experienced actor in James Gandolfini. However, Silvio has to continue to mediate conflict between the guys. There's a lot of problems that he has to constantly solve. Number one, there's a dispute between Bobby and Vito over a route that Bobby is collecting on. Silvio eventually rules that the route is going to go to Bobby temporarily, and then later on they'll figure out a permanent solution. There's also an even bigger dispute between Vito and Paulie over splitting the money from the Colombian job. Vito says he's owed 50% of the earnings. Paulie says that he did the heavy lifting, but Silvio eventually rules that they each get half, which I think is a little unfair because this reminds me of the premise from season 4 when Paulie had that dispute with Ralphie over being owed half of the hijacking job that he did. And in that case, Tony ruled with Ralphie. So I think this is a pattern of, the boss is always going to rule with the guy who's earning the most money, in this case, Vito. However, Silvio also says that they each owe $100,000 to Carmela to help her pay for all the bills and everything going on right now. However, they both don't want to pay in case Tony dies. They're thinking that if Tony dies, they just handed over this money for no reason. And if he dies, they're definitely not going to pay. Even though Tony always says that the guys are going to support Carmela forever, we can clearly see here that they're not going to do that. They're only looking out for themselves. Meanwhile, Christopher and his guys kidnap JT Dolan from this writing class that he's running. And Chris tells him that he has to write a movie script for him in order to pay off his debt that he owes Christopher. Chris wants to make a slasher film about the mafia. He wants to, finance it and run it and then collect the money from, distributing this film everywhere. And he partners with Little Carmine to finance the picture, and he brings on all their mafia associates as potential investors. Eventually, Dolan kind of fleshes out the script, borrowing a lot of details from Christopher's life that he wants inserted into there, and he comes up with the title of Cleaver, and that's the film that they're going to make this season. However, the guys kind of struggle to really understand, the plot and what the movie is even really about. Meanwhile, Silvio struggles under the pressure of being boss. It's incredibly difficult to keep everyone happy. They all want different things. They're always at each other's throats. And eventually he collapses from the stress of it all and winds up in the hospital himself. Meanwhile, Paulie goes to visit Tony, and he starts yammering on as he usually does, talking about his usual bullshit. And we see Tony's heart rate actually start to increase, even though he's in a coma. Paulie talking just really annoys him. And it's funny, in his dream, Tony hears an annoying noise on the other side of the room, in his hotel room, and starts banging on the wall, telling them to shut up. So even in Tony's coma dream, Paulie still annoys him. Eventually, though, this leads to Tony's heart stopping completely, and the doctors have to rush and try to save him from dying. Meadow and Carmela, are crying out for Tony to come back to them, but it's looking like he might die in this situation. Now, I know, again, just like last episode, I didn't touch too much on the dream in this review. Go check out my coma dream video. I cover everything I want to talk about in that video. But I will talk about this last little segment here. So Tony in the dream arrives at the inn at the Oaks house. He's going to the Finnerty family reunion, and they're inviting him into the house, which seems like if he goes into the house, he's going to die. It looks like that's him crossing over, going into the light kind of situation. And he's about to go in. He's about to give up his briefcase and, let it go, so to speak. But he hears a voice in the wind. He hears the voice of a little girl crying for her father to come back to her. And this is clearly Meadow's voice. She's always been kind of the guardian angel for him, keeping him safe. And in this situation, she does the same thing. Tony sees a white light, and he finally wakes up from his coma, and he's back from the dead, so to speak. Now that Tony is awake, Vito and Paulie rush to get the money to Carmela. They're worried that Tony might be expecting the money, and they need to get it to her pretty quick, or else they're going to look like they weren't supporting him. They hand over the money to Carmela, but Carmela can see that they're very unhappy about it. Despite everything they say about being a family and supporting each other, ultimately they're only looking out for themselves, and it's always, always, always about money in the criminal life. But that is the episode Mayhem. Thank you guys so much for watching, and stay tuned for the next Soprano log coming tomorrow. On the third day of Sopranos Timber, my Gumar gave to me 3 French horse, 2 Tonys, and a Sopranos prequel movie. Special thank you to my patrons Hunter, Tommy Smith, Abdallah Alamari, George Jones, Russell, Sean, Graham, Rooftop, Rico Bellick, Heart of Markness, Broccoli, Isaiah, Placenta Juan, Logan, Clean, John Reyna, Lance Klump, Jesse Sterling, Andrew Stewart, James, Conchok Choful, Obstacle Racing Media, and Daz J. Kit. What is up, Sopranos fans? Kino here, and we are back with Day 4 of Sopranos Timber. Today we are looking at the 4th episode of Season 6, The Fleshy Part of the Thigh. Now, Jason Barone is the son of Dick Barone, who has died recently, and Jason is selling Barone Sanitation, his father's garbage truck company that Tony works at, and he's selling it to Johnny Sack's men. Now, Jason was raised away from the life, so he doesn't really understand the mafia's ties to the garbage business. When he goes to see Tony and tells him about, selling the business, Tony warns him that he needs to oversee any plans to sell the business, because he needs his W-2 and his insurance to remain intact, because that's where he gets his legitimate income from, so that he doesn't get prosecuted for tax evasion, and he needs the insurance because he's in the hospital right now. Meanwhile, Tony continues to recover in the hospital, and while he's there, he meets some people who are there in the hospital with him. One is a Bell Labs scientist named Schwinn, and he and Schwinn discuss philosophy related to how everything in life is connected, it's all part of the same journey, and that's something that Tony is really thinking about after his shooting, is how connected everything in life is and what it all means. Another person he meets is this evangelical pastor named Bob. He is a fundamentalist Christian who wants to convert Tony, and he has some very out there beliefs about the earth was created 6,000 years ago and dinosaurs and humans were around at the same time. And he comes off very sleazy, like he looks like he's trying to get something from Tony. He definitely makes Tony uncomfortable with all his talk. The last person he meets is this rapper named Deluxe, who was shot outside of a club. Now, the shooting has raised his street cred, and now he's a pretty big deal. And he kind of looks up to Tony as an original gangster, and someone he kind of models himself after. Now, Tony blames Bobby for him getting shot. Remember, the reason that he was babysitting Junior was because Bobby was busy playing with his model train set. And so Tony thinks that Bobby was the reason he's in the hospital right now. And he warns him that there's going to be consequences. In an effort to try to appease him, Bobby offers to shoot another rapper, Marvin, for money. He's thinking that if this other rapper gets shot, his street cred will be raised too, and he'll have a better chance at getting his record produced. Marvin agrees to have Bobby shoot him in the fleshy part of the thigh. That's where the title of the episode comes from. and he agrees to do it for $7,000. Later, though, Bobby shoots him in the ass, which is not what they agreed to, and he's writhing around on the ground in pain. But Bobby gets the money, and he gives it to Tony as a way to try to get back into his good graces. We see this all the time in the show, that money tends to repair relationships in the mob. Meanwhile, Paulie goes to visit his dying Aunt Dottie. She's a nun in a monastery, and his aunt tells him that she's actually his mother. In World War II, she got pregnant from a GI named Russ. Now, I mentioned before that some fans think this might be Russ Fagoli. All the details kind of match, and it makes it seem like this guy might be Paulie's father. But Paulie goes and confronts his mother Nucci, and when he learns the truth that she's not really his mother, he gets really upset by this and says that he doesn't want anything to do with her anymore. He's cutting her off. Now, when Paulie tells Tony about this, Tony chastises him for his selfishness. He reminds him that Nucci raised him like a son, and Paulie goes about in pity over these little things when he should be grateful for all the great things in his life. Meanwhile, the sale of Barone Sanitation continues to move ahead. Johnny Sack refuses to give Tony what he wants. He doesn't want to continue to pay him or give him a big cut of the sale. Jason Barone tries to back out, but the situation is now out of his control, and it eventually leads to one of their drivers getting beaten up by the new people on the route. Worried for her son, Jason's mother goes to Tony and begs him not to hurt her son. She says it was their fault for keeping him in the dark. And Tony agrees to not, hurt Jason, and he eventually works out a deal with John where he still gets to keep his W-2 and insurance for 10 years. However, Paulie cries from seeing a mother love her son like that. He's going through a very bad time dealing with the feelings over his own mother, and in jealousy, he attacks Jason and demands that Jason pay him money every month and warns him not to tell Tony. So we can see that Paulie, is just taking out his frustrations about his own mother on this kid. And at the end of the episode, when Tony is released from the hospital, he's overwhelmed by feelings that he's so lucky to be alive, and he promises to treat every day from now on as a gift. So we can see that there's definitely been a change in Tony, but we'll see how long that lasts for now. And that is the episode, The Fleshy Part of the Thigh. Thank you guys so much for watching, and stay tuned for the next Soprano log coming tomorrow. On the 4th day of Sopranos Timber, my Gumar gave to me 4 calling cards, 3 French horse, 2 Tonys, and a Sopranos prequel movie. Special thank you to my patrons Hunter, Tommy Smith, Abdallah Alamari, George Jones, Russell, Sean, Graham, Rooftop, Rico Bellick, Heart of Markness, Broccoli, Isaiah, Placenta Juan, Logan, Clean, John Reyna, Lance Klump, Jesse Sterling, Andrew Stewart, James, Conchok Chofel, Obstacle Racing Media, and Daz J-Kit. What is up, Sopranos fans? Kino here, and we are back with the 5th day of Sopranos Timber. Today we're looking at the 5th episode of Season 6, Mr. and Mrs. John Sacrimoni Request. Now, I was going to make a joke about that title being a mouthful, but I couldn't decide whether to make it a Ginny Sack joke or a Vito joke. So let's just drop the whole thing. The episode opens with Johnny Sack in prison awaiting trial. He petitions the court to allow him to attend his daughter Allegra's upcoming wedding. They allow him to, but they force him to pay for the security detail that's going to be escorting him the whole time. They place a bunch of restrictions on him, and they force him to pay for the cost of all of it out of his own pockets. Also, this isn't really related to anything, but I just noticed that his daughter Catherine is the mother from How I Met Your Mother. This must have been one of her early roles. Meanwhile, Tony is finally returning to work. He has this new driver, this young, strong guy named Perry, kind of a hothead, gets into fights pretty easily. Now, Tony goes back to work, and he tries talking to the guys about his injury and, kind of connecting with them and explaining what's going on with him. But Silvio cuts him off because he's coming off as weak, and Silvio is trying to protect him from, exposing his weakness to all of his men, because as the boss, he needs to display strength. Meanwhile, Phil comes down to see Tony, and he brings a message from John. Now, John wants Tony to take out Rusty. John's worried that Rusty will make another power play like he did with little Carmine, and he wants to nip it in the butt while he's in prison. Tony refuses, however. He's done enough favors for Johnny Sack, and it's time to set some limits, so he refuses the request. At the wedding, the U.S. Marshals have set up, metal detectors, and they're searching everyone who comes to the wedding. Meadow is really disgusted at the show of force from the government, and this is one of the things that's going to convince her to pursue a career in law rather than medicine. Tony is forced to step out of line and remove his shoes, but while he's doing so, he almost passes out. And again, this makes him look weak in front of everyone, and further cements that he's not the strong guy that he used to be. At the after party to the wedding, Tony and Johnny Sack finally reconnect. They haven't seen each other in person since John was arrested last season. And John asks Tony to do him a favor. He's in jail, he's in a really vulnerable position, and as a friend, he asks Tony to do him this favor and kill Rusty. Tony finally agrees to kind of placate John and keep Phil in line, but Christopher disagrees with the decision, and he's really starting to question Tony's leadership, again because he's appearing so weak. Chris is acting disrespectful, and Tony can see that he's, losing his loyalty of his men. As the wedding wraps up, the feds arrive and they make this big scene out of arresting John and taking him back to prison, and he starts to cry in front of everyone as they drag him away. And he's so distraught over, how his life has turned out. To Phil, it's an utter disgrace for a man to cry in front of other people, and he loses a lot of respect for Johnny Sack. So we're seeing both ends, both John and Tony here, are kind of losing the respect of their men. After the wedding, Vito leaves his wife. He says he's going to make some collections, but he actually goes to a gay club instead. He's dressed up in this whole leather outfit, dancing and kissing with a guy. But while he's there, some other mobsters arrive at the club. They're there to collect from the owner, and they spot Vito, and they realize that, he's gay. Vito tries to play it off, say it was a joke, but they clearly don't believe him, and they leave. Worried that they might say something, he leaves home and checks into a hotel, because if anyone finds out he's gay, he's dead. He even goes so far as to call Silvio at 3 a.m., just calling to see if he heard anything, and Silvio's, confused why Vito's even calling him that late. But we can see Vito's very paranoid about being caught, and that's going to be a big plot point next episode. Meanwhile, Tony is concerned about his men starting to doubt him. He's worried that if he appears weak, they might even take him out. And he decides to assert his dominance with a show of force. So he intentionally provokes a fight with Perry. Perry didn't really do anything, but Tony ends up beating him to the ground and showing everyone that he's still this strong alpha male. However, when he goes to the bathroom, he collapses and starts puking in the toilet. And we can see that while he's still strong on the outside, or at least that's what he appears, on the inside he's still very weak. And that's definitely one of the themes of the show, is that, despite how Tony appears to everyone else at times, at his core, he's very weak and vulnerable and emotional, and that's the central conflict of his character, of how he balances those two sides to himself. But that is this episode. Thank you guys so much for watching, and stay tuned for the next Soprano log coming tomorrow. On the 5th day of Sopranos timber, my Gumar gave to me 5 onion rings, 4 calling cards, 3 French whores, 2 Tonys, and a Sopranos prequel movie. Special thank you to my patrons Hunter, Tommy Smith, Abdallah Alamari, George Jones, Russell, Sean, Graham, Rooftop, Rico Bellick, Heart of Markness, Broccoli, Isaiah, Placenta Juan, Logan, Clean, John Reyna, Lance Klump, Jesse Sterling, Andrew Stewart, James, Conchok Chofel, Obstacle Racing Media, Daz J. Kit, and William Lanson. What is up, Sopranos fans? Kino here, and we are back with another day of Sopranos Timber. Today we are looking at the 6th episode of Season 6, Live Free or Die. Chris and Murmur are at a Narcotics Anonymous meeting where they run into a mobster from Yonkers, and he informs them about Vito being spotted in a gay bar last episode. They take this information back to the guys, and they debate about what to do about this. Some of them don't believe it, some of them want to have Vito killed, but Tony wants confirmation before they make any moves, so they set out to find Vito. Now, Vito has been in hiding this whole time at his Gumar's place. However, their relationship is just for show. Vito doesn't have sex with her, he's not interested in her, he just likes having a Gumar to keep up the appearance that he's straight. They eventually track him down there and tell him that he needs to come in to talk to Tony and explain himself, but he runs away, thereby confirming their suspicion that he's actually gay. Meanwhile, the plan to kill Rusty moves forward, and Elisa, the boss in Italy, is sending over 2 Italian hitmen to do the job. Christopher suddenly approves of the plan, even though he was disagreeing with it last episode. Tony's fight with Perry has gained the respect of his men back, after he's proven that he can still take any of them in a fight. Christopher sets up a middleman who will provide the hitmen with guns and direction, and the middleman is actually a drug addict who's being paid in heroin, and this is going to become a plot point later on. Meanwhile, Carmela is organizing her annual charity event, and she is helping out with the planning, but she's also growing her business. She owns the body shop now that Pussy's gone, and she's become so wealthy from it that she's even able to put money on the street, acting like a gangster herself. Carmela is really jealous that she's able to be so successful on her own without a man, and she again asks Tony to get the permits for her house. She wants to build a spec house all by herself so that she can prove that she's independent. Tony says that he forgot again, but it's clear that he doesn't care about her project. He's not really interested or trying to make it happen. Meanwhile, the word is out that Vito is gay. Meadow tells Carmela that Finn saw Vito giving a blowjob to the security guard when he went into work early that one time. And when Tony learns about this, he brings Finn in to tell the guys about it. Now that they have solid proof, some of the guys like Paulie and Carlo really want to kill Vito to defend their family's honor. Others don't really care so much and even kind of find it funny. So we're seeing some different viewpoints on homosexuality in the mob. Tony in particular doesn't want to kill Vito. Vito's one of his best earners, and he knows that he could still probably earn more money from Vito being kept alive. And also, despite tradition, Tony really doesn't hate gay people. I mean, he's not a fan of watching it or anything, but he does not want to kill them out of principle like some of the other mobsters do. He also doesn't want to have to provide for Vito's family if he's killed. Remember, Vito is a made guy. If anything happens to him, Tony is supposed to take care of his family as the boss, and Tony does not want to do that. When Phil finds out, though, he especially wants to find and kill Vito. Vito's wife is his cousin, and he takes it as a personal insult that Vito was being gay while being married to her. Sil later informs Tony, too, that if he cuts Vito slack for being gay, others will take it as an opportunity to start withholding money from him. The idea being that if Vito is given a pass for being gay, then they're going to be given a pass for anything that they do as well. So at the end of the episode, Tony is really unsure about what to do when it comes to Vito. Meanwhile, Vito has fled the state to avoid being killed. He leaves his wife and children behind and instead just takes some money he has stashed away with him. His car breaks down on the road during a rainstorm, and he finds himself stranded in a small town in New Hampshire. However, he finds the town is very different than New Jersey. People are openly gay here, and it's a very tolerant atmosphere. He finds that he could fit in there and have his own life as an openly gay man, which is something that he's been wanting. The title of this episode, Live Free or Die, is New Hampshire's state motto, and it also refers to Vito's choice, whether to live free in New Hampshire or go back to Jersey and die. Live Free or Die is also the title of a Breaking Bad episode. I bring that up for no particular reason. But that is the episode. Thank you guys so much for watching, and stay tuned for the next Sopranolog coming tomorrow. On the 6th day of Sopranos timber, my Gumar gave to me 6 seasons long, 5 onion rings, 4 calling cards, 3 French horse, 2 Tonys, and a Sopranos prequel movie. Special thank you to my patrons Hunter, Tommy Smith, Abdallah Alamari, George Jones, Russell, Sean, Graham, Rooftop, Rico Bellick, Heart of Markness, Broccoli, Isaiah, Placenta Juan, Logan, Clean, John Reyna, Lance Klump, Jesse Sterling, Andrew Stewart, James, Conchok Chofel, Obstacle Racing Media, Daz J. Kit, William Lanson, and Johnny Two Hands. What is up, Sopranos fans? Kino here, and we are back with another day of Sopranos Timber. Today we are looking at the 7th episode of Season 6, Luxury Lounge. Now there are 2 storylines primarily happening in this episode. The first revolves around Artie. Now, New York and New Jersey are initiating 2 new members into their families. We have Jerry Torchiano in New York and Bert Gervasi in New Jersey. And they're celebrating this occasion at Vesuvio, but they're complaining that the food and the service has been disappointing lately. Now, Vesuvio is really struggling at the moment to make money and to be successful, and on top of their struggles, there's a new restaurant called Da Giovanni that is much more popular, has a young chef who's doing exciting things, and it just makes Vesuvio look old by comparison. One of the main problems behind this is that Artie has stopped cooking so much and is instead, taking his time to, interrupt the guests and talk to them and tell stories because he thinks he's very personable, but it's really just alienating the customers and driving them away. And the food is suffering too because he's not cooking it directly himself. He also really rejects any suggestion that he change. He thinks he's doing everything right, and he refuses to listen to criticism. Meanwhile, Christopher asks Tony's permission to go to LA with little Carmine. They're looking to cast actors for their movie Cleaver. Now, Tony is hesitant to have Christopher leave. He wants him focused on their mob business, but he reluctantly consents to have Christopher go. Now, Chris and little Carmine head to LA, where they meet with Sir Ben Kingsley. They want him for the role of the boss in their movie, but it's clear that he's not really interested. It seems like they don't really know what they're doing, and he's just there as a favor to his manager. He even interrupts their pitch to go talk with Lauren Bacall, who is there presenting an awards show later. And as they talk, Christopher is really jealous of all the expensive luxury goods that are given to actors for free. It's just publicity for them. And it's where the title of this episode, Luxury Lounge, comes from. Meanwhile, back at Vesuvio, Artie notices Benny flirting with his new hostess, Martina. Artie is in love with Martina, as he always is with his hostesses. And he starts treating Martina really coldly after he sees this. Things get even worse when credit investigators from American Express show up, and they inform Artie that there's been some credit card fraud at the restaurant. Someone's been stealing the credit card numbers from the customers and racking up fake charges. They're forced to shut down the restaurant's credit card access, which further eats into their profit. Now, Artie is really furious that one of his workers would betray him like this, and later on he finds out that it was actually Martina who was stealing the credit cards for Benny. She accuses Artie of, lusting after her and being mean to her when he realized he couldn't have sex with her, which is, of course, what happened. But he fires her after this, and then he goes to confront Benny at his house. This leads to a physical confrontation between the two, and surprisingly in this case, Artie actually wins, and he ends up beating Benny unconscious outside of his own house. Meanwhile, Christopher has relapsed in LA. He started drinking and doing coke, and he tries to intimidate Ben Kingsley into getting him into the luxury lounge so that he can get some free stuff. All this does is ruin their chances of ever getting him in their film, defeating the whole purpose of why they came here. And of course, Kingsley refuses. But he offhandedly mentions that the award show gives away $30,000 worth of goods to the announcer. So later, Christopher and Murmur decide to rob Lauren Bacall, and they end up actually punching her in the face and stealing the goods and running off with it, which is classic Sopranos black comedy. Meanwhile, Tony steps in to settle the conflict between Artie and Benny. He forces Benny to, give up revenge and orders him to have his parents' anniversary at Vesuvio as a way to kind of make up for stealing all this money from Artie. At the dinner, though, Artie makes a reference to Martina in front of Benny's wife, just kind of taunting Benny. He takes it too far, and then later Benny attacks him in the kitchen and puts his hand into a boiling pot of pasta sauce, burning his hand severely. When Christopher returns from LA, he gives the gifts that he stole to Tony. Tony, however, isn't really impressed by the gifts, and he blames the conflict with Benny on Chris being distracted and being away, and he wishes he would remain focused here on the mob business. Christopher says that, he deserves this chance to do this movie because he gave up Adriana, but Tony warns him that he can't play the Adriana card forever. He has to take responsibility for his actions. Another event that happened in the episode is Rusty is assassinated by these Italian hitmen that Tony arranged. He does this as a favor to Johnny Sack to get rid of him. And at the end of the episode, as they're leaving, we actually get a second cameo from David Chase. The first was in Commendatore, and in this one, he's sitting in the plane across from these guys in the aisle. And in the last scene of the episode, Artie cooks this meal for this stranded couple. It's very reminiscent of the ending of season 1 when he cooks the meal for Tony's family when they're stranded. And while he's cooking this rabbit dish, he rediscovers his passion for cooking. He's not been doing the cooking himself and instead relying on other people. While he's doing this recipe, it's a recipe from his father, in fact. He rediscovers his passion. He's enjoying the smells and the sensation of cooking. And we really get the sense that, this is what he was meant to do. This is what he is good at. And this is where he belongs, preparing food like this. So it's a really nice ending, and it's a good ending for Artie to rediscover what it is that makes him special. But that is the episode. Thank you guys so much for watching, and stay tuned to the next Soprano log coming tomorrow. On the 7th day of Sopranos Timber, my Gumar gave to me 7 ducks pool swimming, 6 seasons long, 5 onion rings. 4 calling cards, 3 French whores, 2 Tonys, and a Sopranos prequel movie. Special thank you to my patrons Hunter, Tommy Smith, Abdallah Alamari, George Jones, Russell, Sean, Graham, Rooftop, Rico Bellick, Heart of Markness, Broccoli, Isaiah, Placenta Juan, Logan, Clean, John Reyna, Lance Klump, Jesse Sterling, Andrew Stewart, James, Konchak Chofel, Obstacle Racing Media, Daz J. Kit, William Lanson, and Johnny Two Hands. What is up, Sopranos fans? Kino here, and we are back with another day of Sopranos Timber. Today we're looking at the 8th episode of Season 6, Johnny Cakes. Now, Tony and Carmela are really worried about AJ. He's a college dropout, he's working at Blockbuster part-time, and he isn't really interested in anything productive. He doesn't want to do anything with his life. He even sells the drums that his father bought him so that he can go out clubbing every night with his friend Hernan. Now, Hernan is played by Vincent Piazza, who will later go on to play Lucky Luciano in Boardwalk Empire. And that crowd pretty much only hangs around with AJ because he's Tony Soprano's kid, and they either want to, learn more about what the gangster life is like, or they want to get something from Tony, like money or power or something like that. So that's the only reason they associate with AJ. Later on, however, AJ decides that he needs to avenge his dad to get revenge on Junior for shooting him. So he goes and sees Junior, who's currently locked up at the mental home. And while he's there, he accidentally drops the knife that he brought to kill Junior with. and he ends up getting tackled by security and taken down. Now, Tony is able to keep AJ from getting arrested or getting in trouble, and he yells at him for being stupid and basically almost ruining his life by doing this. AJ says that he did it because Tony always talks about The Godfather, and his favorite scene being where Michael avenges his father and kills the men who attacked him. But Tony tells him that that's just a movie and that he needs to grow up and, not take things like that too seriously. And I think that this is kind of a shot at the people who take the show way too seriously and who try to live their life by fictional stories. So I think it's kind of a joke in that regard. Later on, however, AJ passes out at the club from a panic attack, basically being overwhelmed by all the feelings he has as Tony Soprano's kid and what that means for him. Meanwhile, Vito is still hiding out in New Hampshire. He can't even tell his wife and kids where he's at because he's scared that if anyone ever finds out, they'll come kill him. Phil especially really wants to kill Vito because Vito married his cousin, and he takes it as a personal disrespect. His cover story for being in New Hampshire that he tells all the locals is that he's there to write a book on Rocky Marciano. But while he's there, he starts to grow close with Jim, the owner of the local diner, whose nickname is Johnny Cakes, the title of this episode. One night after being out at a bar, Jim ends up kissing him, but Vito pushes him away, and this leads to them getting into a fight. Vito just can't accept the fact that he's gay. He doesn't want to be out like that, and he ends up attacking Jim, who beats him and basically leaves him there. Later, Vito apologizes, though, and admits that he has been living in the closet this whole time, and finally admits to someone that he's gay. They make up, and later on they take a motorcycle ride out to the country and end up having sex. So we can see a relationship developing between these two. Meanwhile, Tony is approached by a real estate agent named Juliana Skiff. She represents Jamba Juice, who wants to buy the chicken store that Tony owns. He doesn't really want to sell the building because the business has been there forever and it really gives a lot of character to the neighborhood. However, he is interested in Juliana. She is beautiful and he wants to, have sex with her. She eventually convinces him to accept the deal, and they end up going back to her place to celebrate, and this leads to them starting to have sex. However, Tony really feels guilty about cheating on Carmela, especially after she took care of him after the shooting, and he abruptly leaves in the middle of sex and goes back home. However, he's still pretty angry about not getting sex, and so he ends up yelling at Carmela when he gets home. So we can see that even when Tony does the right thing, he still ends up making a mess of it by his actions. Later on, the chicken store is sold to Jamba Juice, and Patsy, who collects money from the place, complains that it's over for the little guy. Earlier in the episode, they tried to shake down this big coffee chain to get protection money like they do with small businesses, but it doesn't work because the corporations are just way more powerful than the mafia, and they're taking over this old neighborhood, they're revitalizing it, and it's basically over for the mafia as these corporations come in and start taking everything over. But it's a pretty funny image that Patsy is complaining about basically being the victim in this circumstance. But that is the episode Johnny Cakes. Thank you guys so much for watching, and stay tuned for the next Soprano log coming tomorrow. On the 8th day of Sopranos timber, my Gumar gave to me 8 maids a cleaning, 7 ducks pool swimming, 6 seasons long, 5 onion rings, 4 calling cards, 3 French whores, 2 Tonys, and a Sopranos prequel movie. Special thank you to my patrons Hunter, Tommy Smith, Abdallah Alamari, George Jones, Russell, Sean, Graham, Rooftop, Rico Bellick, Heart of Markness, Broccoli, Isaiah, Placenta Juan, Logan, Clean, John Reyna, Lance Klump, Jesse Sterling, Andrew Stewart, James, Conchok Chofel, Obstacle Racing Media, Daz J. Kit, William Lanson, Johnny Two Hands, and AL Interpretations. What is up, Sopranos fans? Kino here, and we are back with another day of Sopranos Timber. Today we are looking at the 9th episode of Season 6, The Ride. Christopher is dating a new girl named Kelly, and he finds out that she's pregnant. But he's actually very happy about this. He decides that he wants to marry her and start a family with her. And this is his real chance to have children, because previously Adriana could not. And he actually even starts to badmouth Adriana in front of Kelly. He says that she ran off with some other guy and is probably having that guy's kids, which he knows is not true. He knows that she's dead, but this is just, I guess, his way of making himself feel better about the fact that he let her be killed, even though she loved him. Again, I really hate Christopher for how he treated Adriana. You guys can make fun of me all you want about that. But after Christopher and Kelly get married, they buy this big, nice house, and it seems like things are going really well for them. Meanwhile, Paulie is put in charge of the Feast of St. Elzir. It's this local festival that they have every year. It's a big tradition for New Jersey. And he goes to meet with the church to arrange for the statue of St. Elzir to be included in their little parade. And pretty significant to this whole thing is this golden hat that the statue is supposed to wear. The new priest, though, in charge of the church, demands a higher fee, however, for the use of the hat, because he realizes how much money that the mob is making from this whole thing, and he wants his share of that money. Paulie refuses to pay, however. He's notoriously cheap, and he decides that they're just going to go ahead and do the feast without the golden hat. Later on, Christopher and Tony are driving back from a business trip. They pull over so Tony can piss, and they see some bikers stealing some very expensive wine from the store. They decide that they're going to rob the bikers and end up stealing the wine for themselves. The bikers, who are part of this bike club known as the Vipers, see what they're doing, but Christopher holds them at gunpoint. And as they're leaving, they kind of get into this small little shootout, with Christopher shooting one of the Vipers in the shoulder. Tony and Chris are laughing and having fun about this robbery. It was really exhilarating for them to do this, and they really start to bond with each other. At dinner, they even share the wine that they stole, even though Christopher is supposed to be in recovery and isn't supposed to be drinking. And they get drunk, and they state that they love each other. They have this deep connection, this deep bond with each other. And part of this is we see a scene from the episode Long-Term Parking, when Christopher goes to Tony and tells him about Adriana. This was originally in Long-Term Parking. However, it was cut so that it could be left a mystery whether Adriana was going to die at the end or not. And I think it worked really well in that episode, that mystery element. But we see the scene where Christopher confesses to Tony here. Meanwhile, Paulie is dealing with the fact that he might have prostate cancer. The doctor asks if his father had prostate cancer as well, but Paulie doesn't know because he doesn't know his real father. Although, along with the theory that his father is Russ did mention in that episode that he had prostate cancer, so we see a connection there. But Paulie is distracted from all his responsibilities. He's really sullen and downtrodden. And when he runs into his mother at the feast, he yells at her again and makes her cry. So we can see that Paulie is still, thinking selfishly and just mad about this whole situation. Eventually, one of the rides at the festival malfunctions, and several people, including Janice, are hurt. It's unclear how hurt Janice is, but some other people are really hurt badly. Some kid loses his teeth. And Bobby goes to attack the ride owner, who reveals that it was actually Paulie who refused to pay for getting the ride fixed, and in doing so, put all these people in danger. Paulie and Bobby get into a fight. Bobby says that he owes him money for, hurting his wife. Paulie refuses to pay, and eventually Tony steps in and orders Paulie to settle it. And he also chastises Paulie for, being reckless and endangering the fair like that. And when Paulie tells him about, the prostate cancer and everything he's been feeling, Tony tells him that he needs to stop being such a hypochondriac. He's always worrying. He always has this negative mindset, and it's really starting to negatively impact his life. Later on at the Bing, he sees the Virgin Mary. It comes out of pretty much nowhere. It's a very shocking image. and has kind of a profound impact on Paulie, who is really into this whole, superstitious thinking. This eventually convinces him to go visit his mother, and they kind of silently sit there watching TV, showing that Paulie has forgiven her and is ready to move on and have her back as his mother. Meanwhile, Chris goes to pay Corky for the Rusty hit for arranging all of that, and part of his pay is heroin. Corky is a drug addict, and watching him use the drugs, Christopher relapses and starts using drugs as well. And there's this great sequence of Christopher high at the festival. It's one of the other meanings behind the title The Ride. One, it's the ride that collapsed during this festival, but it's also the ride that Christopher is on drugs. He's on the ride, and we get this great visual scene of the festival all around him, these beautiful lights, and eventually he's left there even after the place closes, just sitting there stoned out of his mind. So we're going to see the consequences for Christopher relapsing like this later on. But after this, he goes to talk with Tony, and they try to connect like they did on that night before. But it's kind of awkward now. They both aren't really feeling it now that they're not really drunk. And we can just see that their relationship is just deteriorated. They don't really have a connection with each other anymore. And it's hard for them to just make small talk and be around each other. And a great detail of this is the fact that Christopher sold his share of the wine for $300, which is insane. Those bottles of wine would be worth probably around $200 to $300 at the time. So he basically just gave it away for free. And it shows how much Christopher values their bond. He was willing to sell this thing that, they had both participated in. And it shows that their relationship doesn't mean anything to him. So a really well done episode, really tightly put together. I love the metaphor of the ride and how it weaves into all the storylines in this episode. But really one of the better episodes of Season 6. Thank you guys so much for watching, and stay tuned for the next Soprano log coming tomorrow. On the 9th day of Sopranos-timber, my Gumar gave to me 9 fishy ladies, 8 maids a cleaning, 7 ducks pool swimming, 6 seasons long, 5 onion rings, 4 calling cards, 3 French whores, 2 Tonys, and a Sopranos prequel movie. Special thank you to my patrons Hunter, Tommy Smith, Abdallah Alamari, George Jones, Russell, Sean, Graham, Rooftop, Rico Bellick, Heart of Markness, Broccoli, Isaiah, Placenta Juan, Logan, Clean, John Reyna, Lance Klump, Jesse Sterling, Andrew Stewart, James, Conchok Chofel, Obscuracing Media, Daz J. Kit, William Lanson, Johnny Two Hands, and AL Interpretations. What is up, Sopranos fans? Kino here, and I am back with another day of Sopranos-timber. Today we're looking at the 10th episode of Season 6, Mo and Joe. Now, Janice goes to talk to Tony about her husband, and she complains about the fact that, Tony mocks Bobby, he keeps him in a lower position, and she says it's because he secretly hates her. He resents the fact that he was shot and blames her family for his suffering. Tony denies this, but later at his therapy session with Melfi, he admits that he does love to cause her pain. He resents her for the fact that she left home and left him alone to deal with their mother all these years. And he feels that because he endured all of that, because he suffered, he deserves everything and Janice deserves nothing. And so he looks for any opportunity he can to kind of put her down. Later on, Bobby is attacked by some hoodlums and his eye gets damaged pretty badly. And Tony ends up pretty much laughing at his pain. He just loves to enjoy the suffering of people, he doesn't like or even associated with people he doesn't like. Meanwhile, Johnny Sack's trial is coming up, and the feds have discovered all of his money. They found it all, and they've frozen his assets. So his family is really struggling right now with no access to their financials. Johnny is a silent partner in this business down in Louisiana, and he sends his brother-in-law, Anthony, to talk to Tony and convince him to force the partners of the business to sell so that he can get his half and he can provide the money to Ginny so that she doesn't have this liquidity problem. Tony decides that he actually does want to do something nice for Janice after all, and Janice loves the Sacrimoni house. She's always wanted to live in a house like that, and Tony knows that John is in this weak position. So he forces John to sell the house to Janice in exchange for facilitating the deal. John pretty much has no other options, so he's forced to agree. And Janice and her family end up getting the house. Meanwhile, Carmela asks Tony to, again, lean on the building inspector so that her stop work order is cleared and she can go back to constructing her spec house. Tony agrees, but after seeing how Carmela neglects the housework and all her wifely responsibilities, he decides he doesn't want to do it anymore. There's this funny scene where Meadow is basically crying to Tony about her relationship, and Tony just wishes Carmela was there to deal with it instead of him. So he decides he's not going to talk to the building inspector and goes so far as to even lie to Carmela and tell her that he was unsuccessful and tries to convince her that they should sell the property and just move on from this project. Meanwhile, John's lawyer negotiates a deal with the prosecutor. The deal is that he will serve 15 years and give up $4 million of his assets. And as part of the deal, he has to admit that he was part of the mafia. Now, John doesn't want to do this because this is technically against the rules for him to talk about the life to outsiders like this. But he pretty much has no choice. It's either this or go to trial. And if he goes to trial, he risks being sent to prison for the rest of his life. So he reluctantly allocutes in court and confesses that he was a part of the mafia. And his admission angers his fellow mobsters, including Phil, who feel that he shouldn't have said anything and he should have stood trial like a man. Phil did 20 years rather than make a deal, which I'm not sure if you guys are aware of the fact that he did serve prison time before the series started. It's a very obscure detail, but we can see it in a couple of episodes. Meanwhile, Vito is still in New Hampshire. He's now in a relationship with Jim. They're living together in the same house, and he says that he loves him. However, he is running out of money, and he really misses his old life. He misses his family, and he misses the glamour of being a mobster. Eventually, he reveals to Jim who he really is, the fact that he's from New Jersey, he has a wife and kids, and Jim accepts him and tries to find him work as a construction worker so that Vito can have some money. However, even though Vito was a contractor back in Season 2 and does have experience with this, because of the fact that he was a captain and he tasted the good life, he really can't stand doing manual labor anymore. And we get this really weird internal narration where Vito is kind of counting down the time until lunch. It's this really weird moment that we don't hear any other kind of internal narration throughout the series, aside from the pilot episode with Tony. So it really stands out here for no particular reason. I think it's part of these weird edits that The Sopranos was experimenting with throughout the series, but I don't really like it. Eventually, though, Vito decides to leave Jim. He packs up in the middle of the night and just takes off without saying anything, and he goes back home to his family. And on the way, he hits someone's car that's parked on the side of the road. And the man refuses to, take money for it. He wants to file a police report, and Vito can't have that. One, because he's a known mobster. I think he just doesn't want the police involved. But two, he doesn't want people to know where he's at or anything like that. So when the guy's back is turned, Vito shoots him in the back of the head. It's the same thing he did with Jackie Jr. in Season 3. But this whole ordeal reminds us that Vito is still a scumbag. We've had a lot of episodes lately kind of exploring a different side to him, and we have sympathy for him. But we're reminded here that, no matter what's going on with him, he is still a cold-blooded murderer. And we'll see where that leads him next episode. But that is the episode Mo and Joe. Thank you guys so much for watching, and stay tuned for the next Soprano log coming tomorrow. On the 10th day of Sopranos timber, my Gumar gave to me 10 little Lord Fuckpins, 9 fishy ladies, 8 maids a cleaning, 7 ducks pool swimming, 6 seasons long, 5 onion rings, 4 calling cards, 3 French whores, 2 Tonys, and a Sopranos prequel movie. Special thank you to my patrons Hunter, Tommy Smith, Abdallah Alamari, George Jones, Russell, Sean, Graham, Rooftop, Rico Bellick, Heart of Markness, Broccoli, Isaiah, Placenta Juan, Logan, Clean, John Reyna, Lance Klump, Jesse Sterling, Andrew Stewart, James, Kachok Choful, Obstacle Racing Media, Daz J. Kit, William Lanson, Johnny Two Hands, and AL Interpretations. What is up, Sopranos fans? Kino here, and I am back with another day of Sopranos Timber. Today we're looking at the 11th episode of Season 6, Cold Stones. Now, Tony and Carmela learned that AJ was fired from his job at Blockbuster. He was taking promotional material and selling it on the side for a profit. And Carmela is just really fed up with AJ's behavior. He doesn't take responsibility for anything. He doesn't have any work ethic. And on top of all of that, she's also disappointed that her spec house fell through and she's not going to be able to build it. And she wants to take a vacation and kind of get away from things. So she decides she wants to go on a trip to Paris with Rosalie. After some convincing, Tony agrees that she should go and have some fun, and he gives her some money for the trip. Meanwhile, Vito surprises Tony by showing up while he's at the mall, and he points out that his brother Brian is standing guard. It's so Tony doesn't, try to do anything to Vito. But this is the first time we're seeing Brian after he got the brain damage in Season 3 from Mustang Sally. But Vito says that he wants back into the business, he wants to come back to life, and he knows that he can't go back to construction because those guys are too homophobic, but he wants to set himself up in Atlantic City, running meth and girls, and he offers Tony $200,000 as a gift to allow him to come back in. Now, Tony is open to the idea because, one, he doesn't want to kill Vito for being gay, but two, this will also be a nice income stream for the family. However, his men are not happy about it. And there's an interesting detail that Syl says that Richie disowned his son when he found out he was gay. But we saw in the last episode that Richie was in when he was killed by Janice, that he still had a relationship with his son. He was complaining about the fact that, his son was into dancing and things like that, but it didn't look like he disowned him at that point. So I'm wondering when it's possible that he could have disowned his son, given the fact that he immediately dies there. It's possible that maybe he wrote it into his will that his son gets nothing, and that's what Syl means by disinherited, but an interesting detail there. But Phil, too, is also really upset that Tony hasn't killed Vito yet. He thinks it's a stain on his honor, and on top of all of this, he and Tony are having business disputes, and the Vito thing is just kind of a distraction on top of all of that. So, with pressure on both sides, Tony decides that Vito has to go for the sake of business. But before he can arrange to have Vito taken out, Vito is attacked by Phil and his men. They ambush him at his hotel, and there's an interesting detail here, which is that Phil emerges from the closet. He was hiding there so Vito didn't see him. But this is kind of an obvious detail that Phil has some maybe hidden homosexual desires of his own. Some fans think that he might be secretly gay. That's why he hates Vito so much and wants him dead, is because it's kind of a self-hating thing. And of course, this closet detail just kind of adds to that. In either case, though, he has Vito beat to death right in front of him, and the way that he's grabbing the sheets makes it seem like this might be kind of like a sexual thrill to him. But meanwhile, Carmela and Rosalie go to Paris, and they're enjoying being in a new environment, in a new city and culture. And Rosalie is having the time of her life. She meets this young French guy, they're flirting, and she's just having a grand old time. But Carmela is being kind of a downer. She has these long philosophical thoughts, thinking about life and everything that's going on there. But she also brings up a lot of negative stuff. At dinner, she brings up Rosalie's dead husband and son, and Rosalie gets pissed at her for kind of ruining their vacation by bringing all this negative stuff from their life when they're supposed to be having a fun trip. And all of this really reminds me of Tony. Carmela is very similar to Tony in a circumstance, who meanders from wistfulness to depression. And we can see Carmela's kind of doing the same thing here. She has a negative mental attitude, and it is kind of ruining everyone's good time. However, right before they head back to New Jersey, Carmela has a dream about Adriana, and in the dream, she's able to realize that Adriana is dead. Her subconscious basically tells her this, and she is left with the realization that this person she cared for was probably murdered by Christopher. So we'll see where that goes next episode. Meanwhile, back in New Jersey, the guys' reaction to Vito's death is mixed. Some are really happy that he's gone, they didn't want anything to do with him anymore, while others feel like New York has disrespected them by killing one of their own. One of the guys, however, though, is really happy because he borrowed $20,000 from Vito, knowing that he would be dead soon, so he basically just got free money from Vito. But Tony is pissed that Phil killed one of his captains without his permission. It's a disrespect to him personally. He feels he needs to retaliate. So he decides to blow up Phil's wire room in order to get some revenge and even the score here. However, before they can make this move, one of Phil's men, Fat Dom Gamiello, who actually participated in the murder of Vito, visits the New Jersey crew. And he starts taunting them about Vito, and this leads into a big fight where they end up stabbing him to death and killing him. And we can see here that this whole conflict is going to lead into a bad situation between New York and New Jersey. There's just so much tension on both sides. Both sides feel like they've been disrespected and they need to do something about it. And we can see that this is going to cause a lot of problems starting from here. Meanwhile, Tony is sick of AJ's lack of motivation. He complains to Melfi that he should have hit AJ growing up. The only reason he didn't is because Carmela wouldn't let him. And if he did do that, AJ might have grown up tougher. However, Melfi correctly states that Tony secretly is jealous of AJ. He really wishes his mother had been as protective as Carmela was. So we can see here that a lot of Tony's resentment for AJ comes from his own internal problems with his own mother. Again, I know AJ is a little shit, but I will defend him from the fact that he had very bad parenting. And in many ways, Tony is tougher, but he's a lot worse than AJ when it comes to how he deals with his emotional problems. But Tony decides that enough is enough, and he forces AJ to work a construction job that he got him and threatens to kick him out of the house if he doesn't shape up. So at the end of the episode, AJ is heading to his job, and this is going to lead into a whole host of things this season based on who he meets there. But we'll deal with that next episode. Thank you guys so much for watching, and stay tuned for the next Soprano log coming tomorrow. On the 11th day of Sopranos timber, my Gumar gave to me 11 emerald pipers, 10 little Lord Fuckpants, 9 fishy ladies, 8 maids a cleaning, 7 ducks pool swimming, 6 seasons long, 5 onion rings, 4 calling cards, 3 French whores, 2 Tonys, and a Sopranos prequel movie. Special thank you to my patrons Hunter, Tommy Smith, Abdallah Alamari, Russell, Sean, Graham, Rooftop, Rico Bellic, Heart of Markness, Broccoli, Isaiah, Placenta Juan, Logan, Clean, John Reyna, Lance Klump, Jesse Sterling, Andrew Stewart, James, Conchok Chofel, Obstacle Racing Media, Daz J. Kit, William Lanson, and Conan Higgins. What is up, Sopranos fans? Kino here, and I am back with another day of Sopranos Timber. Today we are looking at the 12th episode of Season 6. It is the mid-season finale, Kaisha. And even though this is the mid-season finale, I just wanted to take the opportunity here to thank you guys for continuing to watch these episodes. I hope you guys are enjoying Sopranos Timber so far, and I cannot wait to wrap up Season 6B with you guys soon. So thank you so much, and let's jump into the episode. This episode opens with a dedication to John Patterson. He was one of the directors for many of the episodes on the show. He directed every season finale except for Season 6, because he unfortunately passed away after the 5th season. And it's a nice touch that they would honor him in this way at the beginning of this episode. Tony finalizes the documents officially selling the chicken store to Jamba Juice, and while he's there, he talks to Juliana. He wants another chance to continue to see her, but she refuses. She's pissed at him after their last meeting for just abruptly leaving her, and she doesn't want anything to do with him after this. We also learn that she's started seeing Christopher. They're in a relationship together now. She's his new side piece. And he's really unhappy with his marriage to Kelly. And he wants to be with Juliana. He likes her a lot more. They met at an AA meeting, so Christopher feels like she understands him more than his wife does. But Murmur warns him that their relationship could be dangerous to his sobriety. If she makes a mistake, it could lead to him relapsing as well. Meanwhile, little Carmine arranges a meeting between Phil and Tony. After all the business with the Wire Room and Vito and Fat Dom Gamiello, he urges them to settle their differences for the sake of the business. They have a lot more money to earn together rather than fighting each other. Now, they agree to settle their differences, but little Carmine accidentally makes a reference to Phil's brother. This sets Phil off, he gets all pissed off, and the agreement is canceled. Now, I did a whole video talking about little Carmine and his motivations, and some people think that he intentionally messed up this meeting because he wanted to create conflict between Phil and Tony. I explored that in that video, so go check it out if you haven't seen it. Meanwhile, Carmela is still worried about Adriana. Last episode, she had a dream about Adriana in Paris, which made her realize that Adriana is either dead or in trouble. And she suggested Tony that they hire a private investigator to track her down and find out what happened to her. Now, Tony, of course, doesn't want to do this because he doesn't want Carmela knowing anything about Adriana's death. So he gets Syl to finally clear things up with the building inspector because he wants Carmela distracted with that rather than looking into Adriana. And with her spec house project back on, Carmela forgets completely about Adriana. She just focuses on building the house. So we can see where her priorities really lie. Meanwhile, AJ meets a girl at his job, Blanca. She's the HR worker at the construction site. And she's 10 years older than him, and she has a son from another man. However, they end up going out, and AJ really starts to like her. And while they're having a date at her place, some kids are outside being noisy, playing rap music, and disturbing her baby. So AJ goes down to talk to them, but rather than fight them or anything like that, he bribes them with a bike to get them to go away. It's kind of a bitch move, but they end up leaving, and Blanca's so impressed with him handling the situation, they end up having sex. And AJ really starts to fall for this girl. Meanwhile, Christopher worries what Tony will think of him seeing Juliana. He's worried that Tony will be angry at him for seeing a woman that he was interested in. So he lies to Tony and says that he's dating a black girl named Kaisha. You'll remember that this is the name of the girl that the hitman that he hired to kill Carmine Sr. was seeing. So he probably got the name from that guy. But later on, Tony sees him talking with her, and later Chris admits to seeing Juliana. Now, Tony says that he doesn't care, but later on at his therapy session with Melfi, he does admit that it bothers him that she's no longer on the table, and now Christopher has taken what he thinks is his. Eventually, Christopher and Juliana do end up relapsing together, and they start using together, enabling each other and letting themselves get back on drugs. They talk about going to rehab, but it's clear that their relationship is kind of fizzling out, and we're seeing that they're not going to be together, even though they had these strong feelings for each other earlier. Meanwhile, Phil has a heart attack and winds up in the hospital. Tony goes to visit him there, and they have this heart-to-heart. Tony talks about his experience with death and how he came out of it a different person, and they agree to settle their differences and work together. So we're seeing a tentative peace fall between New York and New Jersey in this episode. And in the final scene here, the Soprano family gathers together around the house to celebrate Christmas. The only one who's not there is Meadow, who went to California to be with Finn. But AJ brings Blanca and her son, and they welcome her, but the parents aren't really happy about him dating her. She's so much older, she has a kid, and she's much different from their culture. But they gather together in the room and have this family moment. And while it seems warm on first glance, there is kind of this awkwardness and tension in the air. It's much different than we saw in season 1, which is a warm family moment. In here, we can see that the relationship between all these people have been strained by the mafia, materialism, all of that, and their family is kind of shallow now. It doesn't have the warmth and love that it once had. So even though this is kind of the peace before the storm of season 6B, we are seeing a general decline from the Soprano family. But that is the mid-season finale. Thank you guys so much for watching. I cannot wait to continue to review the rest of the season with you guys. And stay tuned for the next Soprano log coming tomorrow. On the 12th day of Sopranos timber, my Gumar gave to me 12 AJ's drumming, 11 emerald pipers, 10 little Lord Fuckpants, 9 fishy ladies, 8 maids a cleaning, 7 ducks pool swimming, 6 seasons long, 5 onion rings, 4 calling cards, 3 French whores, 2 Tonys, and a Sopranos prequel movie. Oh my god, that was cringe. Special thank you to my patrons Hunter, Tommy Smith, Abdallah Alamari, Russell, Sean, Graham, Rooftop, Rico Bellick, Heart of Markness, Broccoli, Isaiah, Placenta Juan, Logan, Clean, John Reyna, Lance Klump, Jesse Sterling, Andrew Stewart, James, Conchok Chofel, Obscuracing Media, Daz J. Kit, William Lanson, and Conan Higgins.